Hey guys, welcome back to Inside Marketing. I'm delighted today to be joined by Chris Willman, who's the EMEA North Marketing Director for Commvault. He's been very kind enough to give us some time to help us dive into his marketing journey. Maybe understand from his perspective the good, the bad, the ugly, the highs, the lows, etc. And yeah, Chris, thanks for joining us. Great to have you on here.
Pleasure to be here, Josh.
Chris, where I always love to start with these podcasts is, do you mind just giving us an insight into, I suppose, where your marketing career started? Kind of like, what was your entry point, I suppose? And maybe just walk us down the path into kind of where you are right now.
Absolutely. I've been in marketing for 20 plus years now. I started, I think, when I was much, much younger, going off as you do as a kid in very different directions, and wanted to be everything from a vet to a Royal Marine to all kinds of things. And I think as I went through school, went through secondary and college and stuff like that, and actually one of the things that became a real recurring thing for me was the use of language within a lot of the stuff I was doing. So I was really passionate about English when I was studying, and I think a bit of that almost got stuck in my head of thinking, how do I do something with this? I think that almost accidentally, quite honestly, moved into really then exploring when I went off to university, when I was 18, 19, and chose, I would say in hindsight, almost a little bit by accident, to do a degree in advertising and marketing. I have to admit, I think it seemed sexy at the time. It seemed like something that was going to be fun and creative and allow me to get stuck in. I didn't realise it was going to be quite so much hard work. I think I glamorised it as a kid, as we all do. And it's really evolved from there to starting after that degree a very marketing heavy career. I've only probably had a couple of years of my career that weren't specifically within marketing roles. Very early in my career, I worked in recruitment for a couple of years, and to be honest, that was the pound signs that flashed in front of my eyes, and thought, I
did your time, mate.
Sort of 13 grand a year or whatever the starting wage for a grad was. But yeah, other than that, it's been a relatively kind of linear marketing career.
Interesting. And so what would you say, what was the first kind of like proper marketing role you had? Where was that and what were you doing?
So my first actual job when I finished university was I was working in a marketing agency. I happened to have taken a flat in a town I was living in, and discovered there was a marketing agency literally right across the road. And as you do as a student, you think, what, it can't get any better than rolling out of bed, crossing the road and going to work. I was lucky enough to get a short-term contract with those guys. They were really taking on people with the aspiration of their business growing and bringing on new contracts. And I still remember, even in the, I think, 3-4 months I was there, I realized how little I knew about marketing.
Interesting.
I'd got this 3-year degree. I'd got the aspirations and the expectations that I was skilled. I was able to go and do something. And it was this kind of eye-opening experience of, I actually know very little about how this translates to the real world.
Yeah.
But I think I would call it my first real job that really taught me marketing was a couple of years after that. I had the pleasure of taking a job with the Dixon Stores Group, so PC World, Currys, in their head office in Hemel Hempstead. Got tracked onto their kind of induction program, and immediately realised actually, this was a place I could learn a lot. And probably the most eye-opening thing for me was marketing was not what I'd expected it to be. I mean, this is B2C marketing. It's not what I've done most of my career. But it taught me so much. It taught me a real commercial skill set, along with the kind of the creative, customer-driven execution, and that's something that literally to this day I still feel I've retained.
There's a couple of things in there that, and I want to talk about Dixon's, but also what I want to talk about is and I don't think it's changed too much today, but the I suppose slight disconnect between what's taught at university with regards to marketing and advertising, what goes on in the lecture halls and the seminars, etc., versus what actually happens within a marketing role in the real world. What are your kind of thoughts on that, kind of comparing what you're being taught in the classroom versus, when you're actually kind of deep diving into those kind of first marketing roles?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. You're completely right there, Josh. I think it's a case of, again, we're going back 20 or so years ago when I did my degree, but I do remember to this day, it was almost like the disciplines that you were taught were very separate. Whereas I think the world we live in now, marketing has to be, or at least has to aspire to be, more integrated in its execution. And it was almost a case of, one day you'd be taught kind of business management, the next it would be copywriting, the next it would be communications. There wasn't necessarily a way of combining those together in a way that you could actually almost transition into a real world job. And I think that was one of the biggest culture shocks for me, that it was like you take one discipline or you take another, that there wasn't necessarily an understanding of how does that combine into. I think when we chatted before, I said I'm quite proudly a marketing generalist, and I think particularly within a lot of parts of the kind of field marketing I tend to do, being a generalist actually is really important. So these almost little very distinct separate modules that you're taught within the university, it's quite difficult to translate that to a real world context.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so just in the marketing agency, so what did actually life look like in that marketing agency? Because these days obviously we've got the entire digital spectrum, socials, ads, all those kind of things, but like was it very much the early days for that, or were we kind of rocking and rolling full digital, or was it more traditional?
Yeah, I mean, so the agency I worked in was an organisation called Butterfield Morris Bushell, based in Bedfordshire. Their biggest client at the time was Vauxhall, and they were trying to win the Opel European account. Now, a lot of that was retail dominant. It was print. It was producing car literature. I was the guy making the tea and running envelopes around and
Nice.
and doing all the stuff that you kind of cut your teeth learning. But I still remember actually at that point, and this was the same even when I joined Dixon's a few years later, the web integration into this, the digital activation was really quite minimal. And if I compare that to how things are now and the experience of, in store versus online versus social activation, all of that, it just wasn't there now. I've learned a lot of that, and it's become part of my career as time's gone on, but it just didn't exist when I started out.
Yeah, and one thing I find when I do these interviews is like, yes, there's the whole marketing strategy piece, the idea generation, understanding kind of what activities we should be executing, etc. But also what I find is there's a lot of, I think a good marketer, you also need to kind of be a good systemizer, a good person to implement processes, systems, etc. And so when you were at Dixon's, I think one of the things you mentioned to me last time we spoke was something like about working off a spreadsheet with the numbers and stuff to be able to track all the sales of each product. So walk me through what life was like kind of when you kind of, because to me, I think what I heard is like that was the kind of the first kind of really where you kind of learned the trade, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. And my wife would certainly agree that I've developed a weird, almost fetish for spreadsheeting everything. Often it bores her senseless, but I literally have a spreadsheet for everything. I find it's a good way for me to almost organize and systematize my own thought processes.
Yeah.
And it's something that to this day, from a work context, I've retained a lot of their. It was pretty rudimentary in many ways in a way of working. I think I mentioned to you before, we would turn up at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. We would print out all of our product information, line by line, all of the stores that were within the group. PC World, I think, had 150 stores at the time. And I would print out the line by line sales within that and then go through them physically every morning to look for trends. And I think the reason I mention that is because actually what it taught me is how to take large amounts of data and look for behavioral patterns, trends, things that actually stood out that you could learn to understand customer journeys and buying patterns and if you change something over here, how that then impacts something kind of the next day and all of that. And again, then systematizing that within something as basic as a spreadsheet became really quite an essential part of working practices.
Yeah.
And as I said, something I still do to this day.
But Chris, I think I completely agree with that approach and how important it actually is, because I don't know about you, but one thing I find quite often is sometimes there's sometimes two camps of marketeers. You've got the camp where a lot of decisions being made based on gut feel, emotion. I think we should be doing this, etc. But then you've got the other camp who, yes, there is some gut feel elements to it, but it's also we're heavily driven by the data, heavily driven by the numbers. What's the evidence telling us? So how important do you think data actually is when it comes to making strategic decisions, as opposed to just relying on experience and kind of where your heart and mind is taking you?
I think it's pivotal, but it's somewhere between the two things. And I'm genuinely a believer that a modern marketer has to be a combination of almost a mathematician in many ways, and be able to analyze the data and extrapolate that into action and strategy, but also not forget the creative human facing component. And I think almost the more we become technology driven in most of our marketing, and we are, no matter what we do, technology has become more and more incorporated into stuff, and data has become more incorporated into stuff. It's almost easy to forget that you're still communicating and marketing to individuals. I remember probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, something like that, I read a book by a guy called Brian Kramer called, it's like there's no B2B or B2C, it's now H to H, and this concept of human to human marketing. And I still remember now, I mean, it wasn't a big book, but actually the essence of what he said to this day is kind of stuck in the back of my mind as no matter how data driven we get, and that's hugely important, we're still talking to people. We're still marketing to individuals. And it's easy to get, forget that the individual at the end of your marketing programs, particularly when you put them into big, complex marketing funnels, and you're looking at conversions and statistics from one category to another, and how that one thing connects into the next. It's easy to forget that individual there has a personality to some degree. And it sounds silly, but you get so stuck in the numbers and the metrics. That you need to connect on a personal level as well.
I completely agree with that, because I think something I find in our world, obviously, because we're a marketing agency, is like a common question I get when we're kind of going for a piece of new business is, how much experience do you have in our world? And funny enough, that kind of analogy is one I always use around, regardless of whether you're B2C or B2B, you're selling a product or a service to someone somewhere, right? Regardless, because every organisation in the B2B environment, you're usually looking for a decision maker or a cluster of decision makers, essentially. And obviously in the B2B environment, you're a bit more broken down to demographics, job title, headcount, industry, turnover, maybe some psychographics, what challenges are they facing, etc. And it's really interesting because it's like, and when you talk about that funnel as well, the process of driving people through that funnel to understand the conversions from each step of the process, really, I think that's where a lot of the magic happens in terms of new revenue. But so I suppose really kind of with where you are now, how have you seen the role of marketing evolve? Because one thing that you mentioned to me last time and today, and I love it, is you're a proud generalist. Now, how important do you think the role of a generalist is actually versus the specialist of the world as well? Because I think the generalist is super important. What's your thoughts on being able to kind of sit from a bird's eye view and actually understand everything that's going on?
I think it really depends on the role you want to do. Marketing has got so many different disciplines within it that, for example, if you want to work in field marketing, which is predominantly where I've spent most of my career, field, channel, ABM, kind of demand generation programs, I think understanding how to build an integrated program only comes by understanding the different strategies, tactics, ways of execution, and how they combine and collect together. If you can I could be sensational at social marketing or digital marketing, but if I can't look at how that integrates to field events, or programs through channel, or how do you turn that into a real hard-hitting, multifaceted kind of ABM program? You lose that and you end up almost with a term I've used a lot is random active marketing, and there's nothing more ineffective for your marketing budget than random active marketing. It's let's throw some dollars over here one day, the next minute let's do an event, let's do this, let's do that, rather than build a journey of you're trying to engage with an end user in a very meticulous way, or an organization in a very specific way. And for me, the role of a kind of more generalized marketer is you're able to look at the different ways that those things overlay, and how they combine to make a really structured kind of conversation to the end user.
Yeah. And something you said there as well about the kind of like randomized marketing, a phrase we use here is kind of like ad hoc marketing. And there was actually a survey I looked at a few months ago, and it was a small kind of cluster of, it was 100 B2B companies of various sizes, and they're basically asked to describe their marketing efforts. And I think it was like 52% said they approach their marketing on ad hoc approach, so i.e. we'll do a bit of this, bit of that, we'll try this for a bit, give that a go, that kind of thing. Why do you think that is? Why do you think many businesses approach marketing from a we'll try this, try that ad hoc approach?
So it's interesting, right? There's a really famous quote from a guy called, I think it's John Wanamaker, who was a big retailer in the US 100 years ago, whatever it was. And I think his quote is something like, of all the money I spend on marketing his business, or whatever terminology he used back then, 50% of it underperforms. I just don't know which 50%. And I think that's something that I've always remembered that quote, because I think we almost try to measure everything we do, but we're still driven by our own emotions. We believe that we know the best way to connect with something. And I think we sometimes get a little stuck between the need to invest and deliver kind of action, and almost a gut feel that we know the best way of doing these things. I mean, the kind of world I work in, it's often let's do the big shiny thing that we can see and touch and feel. Let's go do an event because we can see that as a point in time, rather than actually kind of strip it back to the essence of what you're trying to achieve. And the more you define your objectives, the more you understand the person or organization you're trying to market to, the more you build a very deliberate program that then says, actually, you know what, an event isn't the right thing, or a social campaign isn't the right thing, or it's a combination of those things. And I think it's easy to be impacted by our own desire to want to show some sort of action or impact.
Yeah. Do you find sometimes, maybe in kind of more SME organisations where, you might have a board of directors or people who are responsible for the P&L, because really marketing kind of sits as a bit of an overhead really in terms of like cost. And what I find sometimes when I speak to kind of CMOs is that there's a lot of pressure coming from above, because they're very eagle-eyed on the P&L, as they should be. Completely right. That's the whole point of those meetings, those board meetings. But it almost sometimes paralyzes the ability to actually try new things and then invest in new activities, because sometimes the view is, well, we'll invest some money, but we want to be able to clearly attribute that investment to a return. And sometimes there's a unrealistic time frame of which that return is expected, i.e. we spend, I don't know, let's say we spend 10 grand this month, 30 grand next month on something, and sometimes the return is expected fairly short to mid-term. Do you think sometimes some marketers and organisations they have it tough, or B, that the powers that be just don't understand kind of like the process that needs to be walked through?
Yeah, I think, it depends organisation to organisation, but almost one of the most important things to limit that happening is the alignment and integration of sales or commercial and marketing itself. And I think when sales and marketing, and I use those terms fairly broadly, when they're aligned and engaged from the outset, it becomes immediately far more efficient.
Yeah.
any of the programs, for example, I run, any of the plans I run are because I want to understand our organizational and operational go-to-market, how that engages with the real kind of levers that the sales organization needs to pull, who are they trying to connect with, the insights they can share, and that should really help me to drive how I build marketing plans. If I don't do that, what I end up with is a complete disconnect in that execution. I end up potentially, building plans or programs that don't add value, or the follow-up just doesn't connect because, marketing only does a certain piece, and I talk more from a B2B perspective. It only does one half of a marketing funnel, and then there's a handover. But, it still has to influence and impact beyond that point as well. But it's that engagement between sales and marketing that's ultimately going to drive success. Like, I'm a firm believer that marketing is a team sport.
Completely agree.
We succeed by other parts of the business succeeding, and it has to be a collaborative kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, I can completely hear you, and what you say there about marketing and sales integration is, I think, critical, and I think sometimes there's not so much an expectation, but sometimes what you can find is in an organisation where there's a human sales process, i.e. it's not transactional and, kind of go to a website, click to transact, boom, where it's a human going through a process. Do you find sometimes it can be tricky to actually get good feedback back into the marketing? And the reason why I say that is because many organisations that I speak to, they have a well-structured, well-documented sales process, right? Which works, it's repeatable. Many people have been through it, and we just know that's how we predict our kind of pipeline. Do you find sometimes, like, let's say you've got an organisation where there's like 10, 15 salespeople all kind of doing their own thing, it kind of, I suppose, leading with their own processes for what's kind of worked for them in the past on the sales front. Do you think that can impact the quality of the feedback marketing get, or not really?
Yeah, I think it absolutely can. But I think, the organizations that really thrive and the organizations that absolutely get the best return from their investments in marketing are the ones that don't do that. The ones that, there is that connect between marketing and sales. There is an understanding of why marketing is investing money, time, effort, activity into building programs, and how that positively benefits sales leadership. And I think when we talk about the connect between sales and marketing, it has to be across all levels. It has to be at that initial executive level, and an understanding, and and a good CMO and a good marketing leadership can absolutely make a massive difference to really connecting at the outset. But then it's right the way through to the sales at the coalface of things, and making sure that, for example, I work with leadership across all of our Northern EMEA sales team, but I also work individually with the sales development teams, the account executives, and I think understanding each of the different elements there is really important, and building the relationships there without ego, which I think is really important, because ego doesn't come into this, right? It's easy to be swayed by that, and I think the more we build that team mindset of collaborative working towards a common goal, and we're clear on that before we do anything, we're far more likely to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to go back a little bit, just in terms of, like, obviously, you've, from where you started out all the way through to where you are right now, like, I suppose from your viewpoint, people who are starting to get into marketing, they're there early doors in their careers right now. So maybe look at their kind of entry level roles. Even like grad roles, for example. What kind of challenges do you think they're going to be facing now coming into this world?
So I think, the average marketer these days has probably got far more technologies at their fingertips than they've ever had. Like if you look at, I think the CMO market landscape, it's like an infographic that shows all the marketing tools available to your average marketer. I've looked at those over the years, and every year you get more and more technologies and tools and platforms available. And ultimately with that, you can almost drive far more efficiency, you can optimize, you can automate, you can do 1,000 things in 10% of the time. But at the same time, that's fantastic. But if you miss the essence of why you're doing those things in the first place, if you miss the strategic planning, the kind of landscape analysis, the alignment to the sales go-to-market, the understanding that you're marketing to individuals as well as organizations. And if you forget that other piece and you almost get too swamped by the technology that you can use and rely on that, you're always going to find things hard. And I think you need to remember the essence of marketing strategy, not just great, I've got 20 different tools in my marketing stack. I can chuck a couple of coins in the top and hopefully some stuff comes out the bottom. It has to be more involved than that. I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of work over the years with like small businesses and the Federation of Small Business and their membership, and I've personally done that to almost strip away the corporate protection of this technology, and the other teams that we can collaborate with and get and focus on the real essence of almost scrappy, agile, basic. Let's just make sure literally every single pound I'm putting into that kind of marketing sausage machine is going to make some sort of impact. And that's always been important to me. And I think, as you come into the world of marketing now as a new grad or someone that's just moved into marketing as an industry, you can almost forget those principles. And I think, not just relying on the tools and the technology to make decisions for you, but using your own brain and intuition and engagement and communication to really overlay that on top.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts around sustainability in marketing? Because let me give you my thoughts first. So what I find is there's some organisations where sustainability is a really core focus. It drips through the entire organisation, and it's kind of a genuine thing that they're trying to make an impact, regardless of what sector they're in. They're doing their bit for the impact they have. But what I'm finding quite a bit as well is for other organisations is it's a little bit of a buzzword, if being brutally honest. And what I'm finding is that marketers in some businesses are almost having to be the driving force in making their brand and organisation be perceived as an organisation which has a sustainability focus of some sort, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because I think maybe marketing, some of us are in a bit of a world where, you do have your eye on the competition, you do have your eye on other markets, what other organisations are doing, etc. And what I found quite interesting actually is how many marketers are actually the ones who are driving the sustainability initiative. Now, do you think that's from a place of it's their job to essentially make sure the brand is best positioned for things that are important to people, or do you think it's something else?
I think it depends to some extent on the type of organisation. So, for example, within B2B, there are only probably a finite number of ways that we can impact that sustainability piece. But I'll give you a good example. When I joined Commvault back in November, we're a 27, 28-year-old organisation that has gone through a massive transformation, a whole brand refresh, product and solution reposition, really to make us a more modern kind of market relevant organisation. And we've seen some fantastic stuff off the back of that. But there's basic components of that. For example, when we did that, we updated and modernised the brand identity. And what does that mean? We've got, therefore, a cupboard full of stuff, which, t-shirts, pens, pads, giveaways, swag, as we tend to call it, that ultimately you've no longer got a use for. And, marketing companies all over the world, organizations with departments all over the world, literally are in the same boat, probably year in, year out. That it might not be the brand, it might just be we change the product or the messaging or something. And the swag and the stuff that we bought for events or giveaways or customer engagements, sadly, often ends up in landfill, right? And I know for a fact many times in my career I've been stuck with the realization that I'm going to have to skip a load of stuff that technically is pretty useful. But actually, we've been through a whole program here where we've worked with an organization called Forward Motion, who are based up in the Midlands, and we gave them literally a van full of stuff. And they've repurposed all of that. They've stripped off old logos, they've re-embroidered clothing, and they've worked with schools, hospitals, charities, local sports teams to give that stuff back. And to be honest, on one hand, you could argue maybe we've done that because it's the right thing to do for our brand, but actually it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think anyone these days has got a responsibility to look at ways to minimize wastage, to minimize loss, to actually, make things less disposable, because we live in a pretty disposable world. If you're in B2C, if you're in fashion, for example, I'd imagine that's a term even more familiar. We've got stores now that produce clothing that lasts 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what world you work
Yeah.
in, you have a responsibility to look for ways to minimize that kind of thinking and behavior. And we were delighted to have the opportunity to do this stuff recently because, yes, it's good for us as an organization. Yes, it's good for us as a brand. But it's also the right thing to do regardless of what business you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally hear you. And dare I say it, the world of artificial intelligence, is that going to help us or break us?
I think, it depends who you talk to, right? It's
Of course it is.
on
Of
one
course it is.
hand, absolutely terrifying. On the other hand, absolutely incredible. I've had the pleasure, I think I gave you one example when we chatted before about some of the stuff IBM shared at a marketing conference years ago. And I remember I did a marketing event in Reading probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I remember they presented a case study where they'd taken basically a brief that would have gone to something like a marketing creative agency and said, come up with an advertising campaign. And they pitched it to a marketing agency, right, go come up with this concept. They then took the same brief and they pitched it, they fed it into basically an AI platform and had them come up with a TV advert. And they then showed that to, I think, 200 different individuals to judge the winner. And I think when they pitched it to industry experts, the agency piece won out by like 60%. When they pitched it to end users, the AI generated piece won out by like 70 odd percent.
Wow.
And I look at that in two ways, and I think on one hand, maybe I need to get another job. I'm grateful. I'm not a creative guy, we systematize. We've talked about technology, and I think there is definitely a way that technology does replace some of the roles, responsibilities, value that we add as individuals. And I gave that example because I think that's almost we pride ourselves on people as being the ones that can be creative. Our machines can't be creative; they can. And AI is becoming far more a part of our marketing journey. We've got some fantastic tools now. We have a tool called Writer that fundamentally allows me to copyright content in very little time in far better way than I can do myself. I'm a bit of a half-baked writer. I published a book a few years ago, but I definitely don't claim to be any kind of writing expert. And I've got tools that can now turn the information I've got into something for emails, for event copy, for whatever it is, something that's far more compelling and interesting. And that's almost become just an interconnected part of how we're doing marketing. But at the same time, then there's that dark, scary, let's not talk about the Terminators taking over kind of situation. And, I don't think we know. I think it's clearly accelerated a lot.
Yeah.
We'd be crazy to not embrace it as much as we can because it clearly does add a ton of value. It clearly does give us an advantage to really connect. But again, it can only do so much. And I think that we go back to what we were talking about before. It's the essence of why you're doing the marketing and who you're marketing to in the first place. It's the objective, the go-to-market setting that technology can't do for us right now.
Yeah.
And I think we need to remember that and build it in as part of our strategy. It's not a take it or leave it.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting thing. And you're right, there's a doom and gloom side to it, and there's actually this is really beneficial and helps us be more efficient and productive. I saw a graph the other day, and it's saying how we're kind of in this phase at the minute where we're still human-led but assisted by AI. And I think that what they were looking at is, will there be a turning point where we're AI-led in some way, shape or form, assisted by humans, if that makes sense? And I suppose that's where the concern is. But I think where this kind of ties into, back to that question I asked you about, marketeers that are coming into the start of their careers and stuff is I think one of the risks, once again, this is just my gut feel really, but I think one of the risks of upskilling new marketers is actually going to be harder, because with the access to all the tech, like we spoke about, and the access to all the AI, it's like, well, I'm not sure on something, I'll just get something else. I'll just get AI to go and do it for me, and then it almost removes the need to learn, because there's no requirement to learn. Because if you don't know something, you can just tap it into a tool which will just give you the answer anyway. Which in theory, I think, once these years compound and the years go on, it could actually leave us with a bit of a skill shortage, really, because
Mhm.
people like you, Chris, who've been through the mill and had to learn and looked at those spreadsheets and understanding all those sales and trying to analyze the trends and stuff. Like, that's really where the foundations of probably what's made you who you are today, right? And imagine having all those tools, a tool back then where it's like you printed out all those sheets, you could pop it into a tool and say, review all this data, tell me what it's telling me.
Yeah.
It's like, it's, what are your thoughts?
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah,
It's yeah. I selfishly have to say I'm glad I'm not the one going through that now, because I think it's definitely, there's a lot of uncertainty there. There's a lot of how do you fit in, but at the same time, for the time, at least for the foreseeable future, there's clearly still a demand to
yeah,
be able to almost harness the technology effectively, not just sit there and let the machine run in the background. It has to be a combination of those two things. And I think, at least for the time being, the individuals that embrace it as part of their journey, embrace it as part of what they're doing, are going to be far more efficient.
yeah,
Not just press a button and put your feet up.
yeah. And Chris, just to wrap up, one question I always love to ask is, if you could step in a time machine, rewind back, you can pick the year you're going back to, maybe towards the start of your career, and step out that time machine and see Chris way back when. What kind of piece of advice would you give Chris?
And I think I'm generally pretty happy with the way my career's gone. I think I've been lucky to work for some amazing organisations. I think at the same time, when I started out early in my career, I probably could have accelerated some of the stuff I was doing more efficiently. And I think if I rewind back, say 20 odd years to when I was doing my degree, I think getting real world practical application in whatever way that comes would have really helped me to kind of hit the ground running far more efficiently. And I think the individuals that look for hands-on experience at its most basic term, and can apply the expertise and insights and learnings they've got in that kind of time, I think they're the ones that really excel. And also to be able to take a little bit of the ego out. I think I remember coming out fresh new shiny degree thinking, right, I know everything now. If I could go back now, I'd go, how little I knew, because I didn't know how it really applied in the real world. And I think that's something that new marketers, new graduates can definitely learn. I wish I'd been able to do it. It probably would have made the first few years a little bit less bumpy. Part of that shaped me and probably helped me to succeed in some of the roles since then. But at the same time, who doesn't want to do better, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose just the last one, Chris. If you never ever did that marketing and advertising degree, and you never ever went into marketing at all, what would you have been doing? Because I remember at the start you mentioned didn't ever want to go into the army or etc. If marketing wasn't the route, where would you end up now? Where would you be right now, do you think?
I think, to be fair, I'd have probably ended up doing something with animals. I always wanted to be
Oh,
a vet
really?
when I was young. I think then I realised that actually, you have to uh, deal with the animals who are in distress, and that just seemed a little bit sad to me. But I'd have loved to have done something there. I'm keen personally that as time goes on, I want to do something that helps, for want of a fluffy term, the community, the
Yeah,
world,
yeah.
the
No, I
people I
rate
engage.
that.
I want to do something that adds value rather than, dare I say it, makes money for an organisation. And I
Yeah,
think something that explores that more probably would have been some sort of direction I'd have gone down. I still believe that you can do that at any time in your life, and it's something I plan to do in the next sort of 5-6 years anyway. But yeah, I think who knows, right?
Yeah, no, good for you,
What about
Chris.
yourself? Where would you be?
Ah, good question. Do you know what? You're the only person that's ever asked me that. And what would I be doing? I don't know why, but I've always had a weird thing for, you get those like police programs on TV where like chasing someone like down the street and stuff like that. I think, and when I watch those programs, like it's such a buzz, and I always think to myself, that must be such a fun job, if that makes sense. It's
Fair enough.
maybe the police, but who knows? And, if there is such thing as reincarnation, I'm sure next time round, that's probably I'll give that a go.
Sounds good.
Guys, there you have it. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Inside Marketing. Wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, etc., like and subscribe. Please share. Connect to Chris on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Appreciate it. But Chris, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure and great to get some insight into your world, but also how you perceive this whole world of marketing that we're all a part of. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Great to be here.
Cheers, Chris.